the registration process and my overview, I'm going to unmute Janet so she can talk about our safety review process and how to make those projects get approved the first time around. All right, Janet, you should be unmuted and able to talk.
Okay, I think I am.
Yes, you are.
Good. Okay, once you get the forms in, that really define what your student's project is, all those forms go to the scientific review committee. And the question of parents always ask is, why do we review projects? Well, we first of all want to protect the rights and welfare of the student researchers and human subjects. So we're looking for safety issues. We want to protect the health and well-being of the vertebrate animal subjects. We generally don't get a lot of vertebrate animal subjects in our local fair, but we want to make sure that should some student be using their dog as their subject of their research, that the health and well-being of that animal is ensured. We want to make sure that safe laboratory practices are used, and we want to address environmental concerns as well. A big thing is we want to provide consistency with the Intel ISEF rules and requirements. And we want to make sure that we follow applicable rules and regulations governing research. Those last two are most important when we're dealing with our senior projects. Generally in the junior and intermediate areas, we don't really run into too many issues with those kinds of things. But we do review all the projects. Every project that is submitted to PRSEF is reviewed by the SRC. Next, Nikki. Okay, what do we look for? We look for evidence of proper supervision. We don't want students doing, particularly if they're doing something that is inherently dangerous, to be doing it without supervision of some adult. We want to make sure that all the forms are completed, that the research dates and pre-approval dates are filled in, that those forms are signed where it's appropriate to be signed. If it's a team project, we want to make sure that there's evidence of proper team composition, that all of the students in a team know all about the project, and it's not just one student who's done all the work and the other one or two are on for the ride. We look for compliance with the rules and laws governing research involving humans, animals, potentially hazardous biological agents, or hazardous chemicals, activities, or devices. So we want to make sure that all those rules are followed. We want to see that there's compliance with ISEF ethics statements, use of accepted and appropriate research techniques, evidence that risks have been properly assessed, evidence of the search for alternatives to animal use. If you are doing a project with vertebrate animals, is there a better way or a different way you could have done it? Humane treatment of animals, documentation of substantial expansion for continuation projects. Again, this is generally something that we see later on with students because a continuation project implies that students have been at the fair previously and have done similar, if not identical, project to what they're doing now. And we also want to look for evidence of appropriate literature search and attribution, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but what that means. Okay, forms that are required for all projects. The first form is a checklist for the adult sponsor. The adult sponsor is the teacher. It is not the parent, it is the teacher. There is another form for parent approval. Form 1A is the student checklist. It's where the student tells us a little bit about where they're doing the project, when they plan on starting it, and a little bit about it. The research plan should be attached to the student checklist. We will have a place in the database where all of the information that should be in the research plan will be stored. The student will be able to either type directly into the fields in the database, or they can cut and paste from a Word document that they have. It must include a detailed description of research and at least 5 references. The 5 references should be listed in a recognized format. And one of our big problems that we've had every year is URLs alone are not acceptable as references. We tell parents this, we tell teachers this, we tell the students this. It is not our job as reviewers to go out and find your reference just based on a URL. It should have the same format as any other reference that you cite, but it can include the URL, but it cannot just have the URL. Form 1B is your parent and guardian approval form. That's where the parent signs off that they're okay with their child doing this particular work. Form 3 we are requiring now from all projects is the risk assessment form. Even if there is no or limited risk, we want the students to get in the habit of filling out the risk assessment, that they have thought about problems that might occur when they're doing their research and how they will deal with them if they do occur. And last but not least, a student registration form, which is basically the beginning form that you're going to fill out when you register a student. That's the information where you say what category you want this project to be in, what the age level is, those kinds of basic things about the project as it gets put into the system. Okay, specialty forms. These are ones that are required for projects that have particular subject matter. Form 1C is the regulated research institution. If a student is doing their work in a college lab, in a company lab, anything that could be considered a regulated research institution, they must fill out Form 1C, but it does not have to be submitted until after their experimentation is done. Form 2 is the qualified scientist form. It's required for all projects involving human participants, vertebrates, and potentially dangerous or hazardous biological agents or hazardous substances and devices. Okay, so if you need to have any of the following forms, you also need a Form 2. Form 4 is a form for human participants. It basically asks you to look for, to have your organization where you are doing your research. Is it your school? It's asking them to look at your research and determining whether it is safe for the human participants. You also need to have an informed consent form for your human participants. There's a sample available. You do not have to use that sample. You can make up your own informed consent, but you have to have an informed consent form if human participants are the subject of your research. Form 5A and 5B are for vertebrate animals. The 5A is for animals where you're conducting the research at school, home, or field. The vertebrate animals on 5B, that research is conducted at a regulated research institution. 6A is for potentially hazardous biological agents. That will be for anything that is, I don't really want to define that too much, because just looking at the biological agents, you're talking bacteria, mostly that's what we see, but it could be other things too. Form 6B is if you're doing research that involves human and or vertebrate animal tissue. Form 7 is required if this is a continuation project, if you are continuing on research that you did in previous years. Okay, so now we get to what the common problems are. These are the things that get your paperwork sent back for review, for revision. An incomplete research plan, a plan that doesn't tell us what you are doing. We need to know what you are doing so we can assess the safety and the appropriateness of the research that you're conducting. Incomplete, missing, or improperly formatted references. As I said before, you must have properly formatted references, and they must have 5 of them. Out of order approval dates. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Missing or incomplete forms for studies following the 4 things I just talked about. So if you're missing a Form 4, but you've got human participants, then you've got to provide that form. Okay. When I talk about next, okay, we talked about an incomplete research plan. The research plan should include these 5 things. It should have a rationale. It doesn't have to be long, but just a short background and why the research is important. It should include the research question and the hypothesis, or an engineering goal and expected outcomes. The big thing that really must be there is the procedure. It must be detailed enough so that we understand what you're doing. Especially, we want to know how you're collecting data. Risk and safety must have a list of potential risks and safety precautions needed. You could pick this information up from your research plan and put it right on to the Form 3. But it should really be in both places, because the research plan should really stand on its own without the support of any of the other forms. And then the data analysis. You should have the procedure that you'll use to analyze the data and the results. Okay, your bibliography must be included in the research plan. We keep emphasizing this because this is a big, big issue with the people who sit on the SRC. It must be included in the research plan, at least 5 major references. For example, science journal articles, books, internet sites, peer-reviewed journals. Okay, Wikipedia and Google are not acceptable as references. Wikipedia, as I tell my students when I go out and do a workshop for students, is a starting place. It is not the place you should end. If you go to the bottom of any scientific article in Wikipedia, it'll give you a list of references. Those are the references you want to use. Okay, if you plan to use vertebrate animals, one of the references must be in animal care. And a lot of this information is in the Teachers and Students Handbook, so you can go and find that. I have a link to that somewhere in this presentation. You can go and find this Teachers and Students Handbook, and it will give you a little bit more information. Use that APA or MLA format. There are several formats that are acceptable. Mostly what you want is the journal, book, internet site, the author, the title of the article that you're referencing, and where you found it. It's okay to find it online, but you need to have all that other information too. Okay. Approval dates is a big problem. Experimentation date, which is on Form 1A, and that's the one that the student fills out, must be after all approval dates. At a minimum, it must be later than the dates on Forms 1, 1B, and 3, and 2, 4, 5AB, A and B, and 6A and B if those forms are required. The new process should prevent the entry of incorrect dates. But I know somebody's going to try and put in wrong ones, so there will be error messages. It tells you just this thing. You're not supposed to start experimentation until you have approval to do your experimentation. Okay. Pre-approval is required by the SRC for anything that involves potentially hazardous biological agents, as I said, bacteria, human participants, hazardous chemicals, activities, or devices, and vertebrate animals. That's what's required. Okay. Okay, you can get the teacher and student guidebook like that at that URL, the first one. The second one is the ISEF rules for all projects. And the last one is a similar one. The first one is actually a condensation. It doesn't have as detailed information as the last one, which is the complete rules for ISEF, which is the rules that we follow for PRESEF. If you have any questions at all, Nikki knows how to get a hold of me. Okay.
All right, thank you, Janet.